Okay, it looks like it's about 2 o'clock. So welcome everyone. This is Introduction to Story Maps. It's going to take about an hour and I've timed it out. It looks like there might be between 5 and 10 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. Probably better if you do have questions along the way, just put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end. Unless it's something crucial like I can't see your screen or whatever. And I have a co-host, so she'll be letting me know if there's anything super urgent to attend to based on your guys' reaction. Because I can't see very well what all's going on when I'm sharing my screen. So I'm Janet Reyes, the Geospatial Information Librarian at UCR. And thanks for taking an hour on this very hot day to learn more about story maps. They're a really cool tool. I think you'll enjoy learning about them. And before I go too much further, I want to launch a poll. So what I have to do is momentarily go here. And I'm just going to ask what discipline best describes, what field you're in, because I think we're going to see a range of fields and things. So give you a few minutes while I'll keep talking for a second here. I mentioned a minute or so ago, some of you may have joined later, this is being recorded, so the recording will be available to you later on. I'm also going to be sharing the slides, which have lots of links that are going to be really helpful for you, and also a handout which has most of the links on the slides, plus some more, so extra content. So you'll want to take a look at that when we do send them out to you later. The basic outline for today is that we are going to take a look at what a story map is. We're going to look at a couple of examples. We're going to look at what you need to create one for yourself. And then we're going to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts on how you go about creating one. And at the very end, for most of the workshop, we're going to be looking at a particular type of story map. It's provided by a company called Esri, or sometimes people say Esri. They're a big GIS or geospatial software mapping company in Redlands, which is only 15 miles away or so from Riverside. And they have by far the largest market share for story maps, but there are some alternatives. So we are going to take a look at those at the very end. Okay. I'm just going to let the poll run a little bit more. We're seeing some interesting results here. I'm seeing humanities, social sciences represented, natural sciences, and the ever popular other. Hard to catch all those categories that might be happening. So let me go ahead and I'll stop the polling now, and I'll just share the results here. So you can see natural sciences looks like the winner, but just by a hair. So now I'll go back to our slides, right? I'll stop sharing results. Okay. What's that? Let's try that again. All right. So with that, before we get too much farther, I just wanted to take a moment to share with you the UCR land acknowledgement. Since we are talking about story maps, and often that involves the use of the land that we find ourselves on, we at UCR want to respectfully acknowledge the original and current caretakers of the land on which the campus is located, and all their descendants and ancestors, past, present, and future. And we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands when we can. We are not there today. Maybe a few of you are, but I think most of us are not. So we just want to take that acknowledgement and reflect on that for a second. And at the very bottom of this slide, there is a link to a map that one of my colleagues let me know about, and it shows the distribution of native lands throughout North America, I believe, maybe other parts of the world as well. So if you are in a part of the world that's not Riverside, at some point you may want to follow that link sometime and just see who has come before you on the space you currently occupy. Okay. So what is a story map? I've got two definitions that I dug up when I first presented this workshop. I guess it was about 2 years ago now. And neither of these definitions hold up super well, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So you can see the more formalized definition is the one on top. It's a web app first developed by Esri. So anyone can combine maps with narrative text, images, and multimedia content. And the key word there is like anyone. It's not you don't have to be a GIS or technology expert to do this. It's really, they've made it as user-friendly as they can, I think. And the more poetic, shall we say, definition is a means of harnessing the power of maps to tell your story. So I do have a few examples here I wanted to show you before we go much further. I'll just go this way. Yeah. So this is one story map that was created in May. And it's about somebody graduating from high school amidst the pandemic. I'm just going to scroll through it so you can get an idea of what people can do with a story map. So as you notice, we have a big title and a big wall-to-wall image behind the title. We have some text. Here's an image that doesn't take up the whole screen with a caption underneath. We have text. We have a video we could watch. More text, another image, text. And here's something that's called a slideshow, and we can advance through these images by clicking, going to the right. So I'm not scrolling now, right? We're just clicking through. And then we scroll down some more images. That one's kind of almost to the edges of the screen, but not quite. Here's one that's off to the side, and we have text over here with a caption. And then this is a different type of presentation where I am scrolling and you see this text box moving. And as it moves, a different image comes up in the background. So it corresponds to what the text box is telling us. And then this is our closing image. Okay, so that's one example of a story map. I'm now going to show you one that's quite different. This one was put together by National Geographic, and they, of course, know a lot about telling powerful stories with images. And so I think you'll find this one is pretty high octane here. So this is about mapping Mount Everest. And the date here is July 2nd. Now, when I first came across this, it was at least a year ago. So this is one example of how you can publish a story map and still update it after it's been published. Add new content after you have first published it. So that's something good to know, right? So same kind of look, basically. I'm scrolling down. Here's an image off to the side. But then they hit us with this wonderful feature. This is a 3D scene. So I can pan around. I can change the angle I'm looking at things. And that's pretty cool, right? So we can move on. We have a static map with some text. We have the scrolling. It's happening on the side. And notice that as I scroll, the image over here changed, right? More images. Yeah, it's been a little jumpy today. I guess with all the heat or something, it's sometimes not performing quite as smoothly. Here's a video that just started as soon as I got there, as I'm scrolling. Static image. This is another video, a drone flyover of base camp. We have more images, more text. Come on. There's an avalanche coming toward base camp. I'd be nervous if I was down there. There's a little divider line there. I'll point that out later as a feature. More images. An illustration. We've got a video that starts again automatically as I get to that point. Now here's the same kind of idea, but as I scroll on the left-hand side, the contents of the map changes depending on what we're talking about on the left-hand side. So that's something else that's a possibility. Another divider line, heading. Here's a button that you can click, or your readers can click, to take you somewhere else to learn more about what's going on. And then this fabulous ending image where they show the light from all the headlamps of all the mountain climbers going up to the top. So there you go. There's a couple of story maps for your enjoyment. And I do have another poll. I would like to maybe just try that now. Let's see if I can get back there. So my second poll is, I just want to know, have you seen anything like a story map before? And I've given you some choices, so just let's see what your level of experience is with all of this. Okay, so, yep. I'm just watching the results come in. Give you a few more seconds. Okay, I'll end the polling and we'll share the results. So it looks like for most people, you have seen story maps that look like these. Okay, and the next most popular one, I guess, is you've seen one, but it had a different look. So we'll talk about the reasons why that might be. So thank you all for participating in those polls. And now we go back to this. Oops. Okay. Sorry about that. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, so what do you need to make a story map? Well, there's one thing that's essential if you're going to use the ArcGIS platform, is to get an account for ArcGIS Online. And if you're affiliated with UCR, you can do this by following that URL, ucr.maps.arcgis.com. And when you get there, you can click sign in at the upper right-hand corner. And you have the option of signing in with your UCR net ID and password. When you do that, an account is automatically created for you. You don't have to request it or anything like that. You're in, and you can go ahead and make your story map. If you're not affiliated with UCR or any other organization that has its own ArcGIS Online organization account, what you can do is create a free non-commercial ArcGIS public account. And we provided the URL for that to get you right to that point. There are ways to you can get to this through the Esri website, but I just thought I'd give you the direct link so you could just get right there and be able to create your public account, which enables you to make a story map. And I've also clicked again, and you see what it came up with is text and images. So I think from what we saw, you could have a story map that's all text and no images, or vice versa, but I don't think that would be super duper helpful. So I think it's safe to say that you need both text and images to make a story map. And in addition, there are some things you can have. And the first one I've got is maps, and I have an exclamation point after that for a couple of reasons. One is that I like maps a lot. That's what I kind of do for a living, so hooray for maps. But the other thing is that it's not a must-have, it's optional, and they're called story maps, right? But think back to the first example we saw with the gal graduating from high school. There were no maps in that story map, so it's okay to do that. Nobody's going to come after you and say, you didn't have a map in your story map. That's just not acceptable. That's not the case. So you can definitely make a story map that does not have any map content in it. You can also add, if you like, multimedia content when we saw some examples of that, right? We saw video, the 3D web scene. You can link to different web content, and we'll talk about that kind of thing a little bit later. But most importantly, to make a story map, you need a story to tell. And so I will just click through some of the general categories why people make story maps. A lot of people use it for telling the story of the cause that they care about a lot, illuminating your cause. And there's many more reasons, of course, but yeah, to do this, it helps to have the story to tell, right? So I'm going to share a couple of storytelling tips. You may have heard these in other contexts, but they also apply here to making a story map to do the best job possible. It helps to start with reflecting on what's your purpose, why do you want to make a story map, what story do you want to tell, and who your audience is going to be. So certainly if you are concerned about the fate of tigers in the world, and you might make a very different story map if your audience is middle schoolers versus decision makers who have the ability to maybe change the course of what's going on much more immediately. So, you know, that of course would influence the kind of story map you make and what your contents are. And also think about the key takeaways. Once somebody is done looking at your story map, what is it that you would want them to feel or understand that they didn't know perhaps when they first started looking at your story map? So that helps guide the whole process as you build it. You want to choose design options that best fit your story. So we saw the 3D scene, for instance, in the Mount Everest story map, and that's awesome. But if your story doesn't really call for that, then not a good feature to put in there. I've heard a saying lately this summer that just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So you want to choose the options that fit your story the best. And then this one is kind of markety sort of feeling, but it is true. You want to lure your audience in and then keep them engaged. So you want to start with that compelling or attractive image at the very beginning and a title that will catch somebody's attention. We all know everybody is scrolling through a lot of things all day long. And if it looks boring, they're going to keep going. So you want to really think about how you capture them with that initial image and title. If it's possible, then put something in the first paragraph or two that's going to catch their interest as well. Maybe introducing some tension or something that's unexpected, and people might want to keep reading to learn more about, oh, I didn't know that. Why is that the case? You know, that kind of thing. A story map is not the place to go on and on and on and on with a lot of text and a lot of really big words. We want to keep it concise. It is very visually focused, so yeah, just think about the text is there to say what it needs to say and nothing more. And same thing with if you're using maps, same kind of idea. Some people get so thrilled with the idea of like, I can make a map, and they pile on everything that they can possibly think of onto that map because they're so impressed that they can make a map. But that's not really going to help a lot either. You want to just include the information that you need for what you're saying at that point. Remember, we saw as we scrolled through the Mount Everest example that they changed what was on the map as we scrolled. So that's one option instead of piling everything onto one map. But whatever it is, even like images and things like that, try not to go overboard. Try just to limit it to what's going to tell your story the best and not overload people with a bunch of things that they just have to scroll through. I hope that makes sense. And then at the end, it helps if you can give the viewer something to do. So again, at the end of the Mount Everest story map, we had that button where they could push to find more information. If you're promoting a cause and perhaps you would like people to donate to that cause, you could have a button that leads them to the opportunity to donate. Something like that, something that they'll feel like, okay, I gained from this, I want to know more or do more, and here's what I'm doing right now before I leave this story map. So, yeah. Okay, so we've looked at what a story map is and how you or what you would need to get going on making one. Now we're going to look at more of the nuts and bolts about how to use the ArcGIS Story Maps builder. So the first thing you would do is go to this URL, storymaps.arcgis.com, and sign in. You can also go in through that organizational website, and you can get to making a story map that way, but this is the most direct thing if you just want a story map and work on that and nothing else. And at the top of the screen, when you log in here, you're going to see this button up in the upper right, New Story, and that's what you would push to get your story map going. At the bottom of the screen that you're going to see are a lot of useful resources. And I would call your attention in particular to this very first one. It's a story map about how to make a story map. We are going to take a look at that later, but it's probably going to be your most go-to reference of anything that you'll find about how to use the Story Maps builder. And you can see they also have things like frequently asked questions, a webinar series, and so forth. So lots of great resources for you right there when you first get in. All right, so when you push that button for a new story, you're going to see something that looks like this. And it gives you the option of titling your story and adding a subtitle. And you see that you can add either an image or a video. You can have a little video running in the background under your title. So that's an option there. I'm not sure. I had the impression that you kind of have to put something in before you can advance along and do the rest of the story map. I don't think that's true anymore, but I think it was true at one point. But anyway, you can always put in something just as a placeholder and come back and fix it later if that's the case. Once you scroll past this title area and you click anywhere in the white space below, there's going to be a plus sign and it says add content block. And that's how we get going on adding content to our story map. And the next several slides are going to walk you through all the choices you have on how to make a story map. So at the top of this is called the block palette. And at the top, it's pretty obvious what's there. If you click on text, you can add text. And this is something that is new. I looked at this maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was configured differently. And it surprised me greatly when I just reviewed my slides one more time yesterday, and they say, what? They've changed how this looks. So yeah, you click on text, and then you get this kind of menu appearing where you can decide whether you needed to add a big bold title or a regular text or a bulleted or a numbered list or a quote, things like that. So that's how this works now. It was a surprise to me, but it's probably better, works better. The button, like we saw with the Mount Everest map, where you push to do more things, that's an option that you have here. And the little separator line, where you want to just make a division between parts of your story map, you add it from here. So moving down the block palette, next we're looking at image, video, or audio. And you have options here. If I look at what I've written at the bottom of the screen first, you can, for any of these, click to media or link to media on the web. But I'm cautioning you, and you will also see cautions when you do this, that you need to make sure it's okay for you to share and you're not violating anyone's copyright. So, and I noticed that they have added, when you click on one of these things and you want to link to media on the web, they add that caution in. They say, click here to learn more, so you can read more about the kind of things you would need to do to make sure you're not violating any copyright laws if you're using imagery or whatever from the web. Otherwise, you can upload it from your device, and I've included some of the parameters for the kind of things that you can upload. Yeah, and these might change because I'll tell you, they are doing a lot of development on this tool, and things are changing a lot all the time. So this is like a snapshot in time. It may even be out of date in some ways. I don't know. I haven't checked every single thing on all my slides. But just so you know that they are continually adding features and making changes to what's possible. So take this with a grain of salt if you're going to dig in like 2 months from now. And say, wait a minute, that's not what it is. I can do more than that. You know, it's entirely possible that's going to be the case. Next, you could, on your block palette, you could have the choice of adding a map or embedding online content. And I want to talk a little bit about the maps because maybe a lot of you are not super comfortable or familiar with working with maps. That's okay. So where might you get a map to include in your story map? Well, if you have that ArcGIS online account, you can create maps in there. And it is, it's not, I wouldn't say easy, but it's a lot less complicated than if you were learning the full-blown desktop GIS that you may have heard people need to take like a whole 10-week class to learn even the basics about it. It's using ArcGIS Online to make a map is not quite that complicated. So that's one option. Also, if you are in, say, the UCR ArcGIS Online organization and other people in that organization have created maps that they are willing to have people share, you could take one of those and put it in your story map. The next bullet point says Living Atlas of the World, and that is a feature provided by Esri that it's kind of like what it says. It's, you can access thousands of automated maps, web maps that contain authoritative content, anything from census data to public health data, natural features, you name it. There's a lot of content in Living Atlas available to you. And it's, like I said, it's all authoritative, so you don't have to worry too much about did this person who made this know what they were talking about or not. It's all been vetted for, I think, almost entirely. So that's a really good source. And you can get to that through through clicking on this map icon and also within ArcGIS Online. Making an express map, we'll take a look at what one of those looks like in a little bit, but this is something you don't have to go anywhere else. You can make this map right from within the story map builder. And it's pretty much, they give you a base map and you can add a few arrows or points or some text, identifying the points of interest kind of thing. So that's a really, really lightweight way to make a map. And that's available to you right through this tool. And lastly, I just want to mention that maybe you find a scan of a printed map, so it may not be interactive. Like maybe you see a map that was scanned and it was originally a map of, say, the Holy Roman Empire or something like that. And you can certainly pop that in as an image. It may not be interactive though, unless you do some fancy things with that. And I'm sorry, embed online content. So you see some of the types of content that may be web apps, dashboards, social media, websites, all those good things. Sorry. Immersive block choices in beta. So remember I told you they've changed around some things that weren't in beta, and now they're identifying these two things as being in beta. So chances are they might change for sure by the time they take that beta sign off of them. So one is the slideshow, and we saw how that works in the first story map I showed you, where I was just advancing through several images, and it was kind of advancing laterally or in place rather than by scrolling. And that could also be maps or 3D scenes or videos or any combination of those. And swipe, this is something that's pretty new to this version of Story Maps. And we can take a quick look at that later as well. If you imagine you have, maybe you've seen this in other locations, two images or maps side by side, and you could move the divider between them, slide it back and forth. So it's great for showing change. Often, like I've seen this after, say, disasters. So you have an aerial image of a neighborhood on one side before the fire, and the exact same place and same scale and everything on the other side, and you see what it looks like after the fire. So that's something that you can have in your story map. I've also seen it done where it's maps that are side by side, but one map, in fact, this was an example I saw. One map was counties of the United States, and it showed by color the how much obesity was prevalent in that county, and on the other side, same counties, different colors, showing prevalence of diabetes. So then you could swipe and see how those kind of compared, whether there was a sort of a correspondence between those two things.
I have a question about what does beta mean?
Oh, beta, okay. That just means that they rolled it out because they're pretty confident that it's going to work for you, but they are maybe thinking there could be some bugs, so they're not just 100% confident it's going to work in all ways, in all uses and that kind of thing. So it's almost ready to go confidently, but there may be some things that you find that don't work quite right. So that's my explanation of beta. That's probably not like the super most technical and perfect explanation, but that's how I look at it. So thank you for that question. The last part of this block palette is immersive block choices that are not in beta, so they are pretty sure that these are going to work just the way they should. The first one is the sidecar, and we saw that quite a bit where in the two examples we looked at, where on one part of the screen you were scrolling through text, and on the other part of the screen there was like a stationary media panel, but it changed as we moved to different parts of the text, right? And one thing about this is if it's a map that you have in the media panel, there's an option to use what's called a map action. And what it could be is maybe you start out that portion of your story map talking about all of Australia, say, and so there's a map of all of Australia. And then you're going to start talking about Sydney, Australia. And at that point, the same map, but it would just zoom into the location of Sydney, Australia. So that kind of a thing is possible to do. And then the last one is a guided tour. And this image is too small. I kind of ran out of room on the slide, but on the left side down here of this image, you can see that this is what's called a map-focused guided tour. So the map is the bigger thing of the two, and it's got points on it. And as the user clicks on one of the points, they will have text and possibly an image pop up that talks about what's going on at that location. Now you can do it the opposite way, which is what we see on the right-hand side, where the map is kind of small. The user can click on the points on the map there, and you will have a much larger image and text as well, describing what's there. So I hope as you're seeing all this, it's kind of giving you ideas about the possibilities of what you could do with a story map. And now I am going to show you one that I started. I have not finished it. I kind of got sidetracked, and it's become kind of my sandbox of playing around with stuff. So I hope you don't mind. It's a little messy, but it just shows you you can experiment with a lot of things before you actually push that publish button and share it with the world. So let me bring that one up. It's here. So my husband and I went to New Zealand last December, and it was awesome, and there's lots of awesome pictures, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to make a story map to share all of those our adventures there. So that's what this started out to be. So you can see I found what I thought was a really awesome image and put it in back of my sort of okay title, I guess. Then I created some text. And you can see that little plus sign here. If I push that, I'm going to get that content block that we just looked at, right? Next, we have the bird song down there was really interesting and different and beautiful, and I wanted to have that playing on my story map. The first time I tried it, I think some people on this call have seen a story map workshop I gave earlier on, and it was the kind of thing where the bird song started as soon as you got into the story map, but then it wouldn't stop until you pushed the button. It was like, enough of the birds already. So then I tried it this way, which is kind of linking to a website where you can then choose the clip of what kind of bird song you want to listen to. And so you have more ability to turn it on and off. I'm still not happy with that, and I think there's better ways to do it, but I've just left it here for now. And one thing I'm going to show you too is as I hover over here, these 6 dots come up, And if I click on that, I can drag this around. So if I'm, you know what, I don't want to start this whole thing with birdsong, I'll just drag it to later in my story map. I can do that. I'm not seeing those same kind of dots when I hover over the text though. So I think that's going to be, to change the positioning of the text, it's going to be like, you know, cut and paste like you do in any other document pretty much. So this is one of the express maps I was telling you about. I just made it very, very simple. All I did was add this arrow just to point out where New Zealand is, because a lot of people aren't quite sure where that is. Now, this is a map that shows the tour we took, and it's from, you know, the tour website. And it's not very pretty, but it does show where we went. So yeah, if I was really going to publish this, I'm not sure I would keep that. I might try to make one that's better looking for myself. Here's a separator, rather. And again, you can see I could drag this around if I decide I don't like where that is. Now there's 2 islands, and we started in the North Island, and I was looking for nice maps of the North Island. And I like the way this looks, but it doesn't really do the trick for me. Not enough places are identified, and you can't tell as you zoom in which places are bigger than, have more population than others. So it's nice looking, but it doesn't do the trick, and I would probably not include it if I ever went ahead and published this. This is one of those maps that's like what you would get if you rented a car and they give you that little tear-off map before you take off. So it's better at representing the towns of the North Island, but it's not very attractive either. So again, I think I would probably try to find something better than this if I was going to publish this. Now, this was my version of the slideshow. And a little embarrassing here, but I'm going to go ahead and show you. As I advance through, some nice pictures that we took, lots of sheep. You're going to see lots of sheep down there. And then we get to this picture. Yes, it's upside down. It does not look upside down on my computer. It only goes upside down when I load it into the story map. And so the workaround is that once you do this and notice that your image is upside down, take it out of the story map, use a image editor, rotate it, save the rotated copy, and then load that one into the story map, and it should work. I didn't do that. What I tried to do was just take a screenshot of it while it was up on my computer screen and paste that in, and that worked okay, but you lose a lot of crispness there. So not the best solution, but it was a workaround for somebody who was very frustrated and wanted to move on. So I don't recommend it as a solution, but it'll do in a pinch, right? Then another image, and then another image that's upside down, and that's when I said, I'm done. I don't want to mess with this right now. But eventually I would figure out how to get that right side up. So I'm just doing it as a cautionary tale, because if it happened to me, it could happen to you. And unless they have worked out that bug, and it's not an issue anymore. So you just never know. I'm going to show you at the bottom here. If I open this, I can see what my slides are, and I have the ability to drag them around, do other things. So yeah, once you set this up, it's not necessarily set in stone that that's the order your photos are going to be. I linked to a Wikipedia article about glowworm caves that we saw. I didn't make any videos, but I was able to paste, to copy this one in that people could watch that somebody else had made. I put a divider in, and then this was going to be the part about the South Island, but it's not really about the South Island. I just put stuff in there now so I can show you guys some of the features we talked about. So this is what the swipe would look like. If you can picture different images on either side, and you can move the slider back and forth, and you can compare. This is what the sidecar would be like as you're building it. So I could put some content in there. And as I scroll, here's my next block, and the image could have changed or it could have stayed the same. Again, we have this thing on the bottom where you can rearrange your slides. I saw something about you can make the transition different, that kind of thing. So you got some options there. And this was my version of the guided tour. I chose to make the map small. I just really basic started. So I plopped a point in Los Angeles and found this image online of LAX. And then as I scroll, we end up in Auckland. And again, I found this as a image for free use online. And you could keep going with that. So that's about it with what I was messing around with, and I hope that it helps a little bit, at least, give you an idea of the possibilities and how you can noodle around with things and decide whether they work for you or not. So let's see, we're coming up, we've got about 20 minutes left. So up at the top of your story map, you're going to see this button for design, and when you click on that, you have some choices. And I think I'll go back to my story map one more time just to show you these in addition to talking about them now. You can change the way the cover is configured. And it also allows you to pick the focal point of the photo you use in the cover. So that photo I had, I was able to kind of move it around and get it to where that waterfall was just where I wanted it to be. So that's a useful thing. You can change the basic look of the story map, the accent color and the font. If you're working for an organization and you want to put their logo up in the header, you have the option to do that. You can add tabs for navigation, and then we'll look at an example of that in a couple of minutes. But if you have a really long story map and you have lots of sections to it and you want people who are maybe at the top to be able to go down to a later section without having to scroll all the way down there, that's what the tabs are for. It enables them to jump to later content and back again and all around. And then at the end, you can also have a section that's specifically designed so that you can give credits for people who helped and what their roles were and things like that. So that's one thing that you can do as well. The preview button allows you to see what the story map is going to look like on a smartphone and on a tablet and on a computer screen. So that's helpful. It might help you make some design choices before you publish. And you see the publish is also circled. And so you have to be really intentional about publishing. It's not like something that's easy to do by accident. But never fear, if you publish it and you're not sure you're really done, you can still make edits after publishing, which is what I mentioned with that Mount Everest story map. They definitely made some edits after it was first published. And you can even unpublish. So like if you said, oh, I made a big mistake, I should not have published this. There is a way that you can unpublish and you can republish again. And then you have sharing options. So it could be that it's just for yourself to look at. If you are in like the UCR ArcGIS Online organization and you're okay with other people in the org looking at it, you can have that setting, or you can share it with everyone, which means anyone who has the link in the whole wide world could take a look at it. That ... button, I think that's kind of new. It may have been there before, but anyway, what it does is a couple new things. These features I know are pretty new because they just announced them last month. You now have the ability to make a duplicate of your story map. This would be handy if you have some design choices or big content choices and you're not sure which way to go. At that point, you can make a duplicate and put one aside and then keep working on the other one, and then you can come back and decide which way you like better and proceed with the one that you like better. So that's a nice feature, not available up until this year. Also, you have the ability to print your story map to PDF. So it's not going to be interactive, of course, but it could be a handy way for if you wanted to show somebody else the content you have so far, the basic look. You could send them the PDF and they could view it offline and make suggestions that way. So those are two new features. Also, by pushing the ... button, that's where you'll find the ability to delete your story map. So yeah. And so this feature, collections, I think this was available before, but they've really beefed it up this year. So the idea here is you might make a lot of story maps, and you might have story maps that are all related somehow in a theme, like maybe they almost serve as chapters in a larger narrative, or you're showing things over time, or you just want to have a portfolio that you provide a link for and somebody can look at your portfolio of the story maps you've made. So the collections enables you to do that. Okay. And there's some view options. It could be like a gallery view, or it could be a tabbed or bulleted kind of list. And I put a link where you can learn more about how to leverage the ability to have collections of your story maps. Okay, so I put a lot of links here. And again, you'll have the slides, you'll have the ability to click on these links later on. At the bottom here, I've got one for accessibility, which is something we all need to pay attention to make sure anybody with varying abilities can get the most out of our story maps. So there's some suggestions about that. But the one at the top here, your best guide for a story map is, that's what I'm going to share with you now. This guy. No, not that guy. This guy. This is a story map about making story maps. And it's by Alan Carroll. He's the guy who thought of story maps in the first place. He originally worked for National Geographic and ended up at Esri and developed this idea, which just took off. They're only 8 years old, and there's over 1 million story maps published in the world. So this, I come back to this all the time, and you'll notice August 12th, so it was just updated a week ago. So that's why I was caught off guard by some of the changes that had been made. So you'll be wanting to come back to this and see what the latest changes are. And here's an example of the tabs at the top. So, you can skip some of the early, content and get down to, I just want to know about how do I publish and share, because I forget what that librarian said. So yeah, you can just hop on down to that. So very, very useful starting point, reference moving forward. So classic story maps. So from 2012 to 2019, classic Esri story maps were the only game in town. That's how they started out, and they just switched over to this new template that we've been looking at in 2019. However, classic story maps, a lot of people like them a lot, and the new template doesn't have all the functionality that the old classic story maps had, so some people would still like to use these, and they are still around. However, Esri is mostly focusing on developing the new template and the new story map builder, and then maybe in 4 more years, they're probably not going to support the classic story maps very much. But my next slide does show all of the different templates from the classic story maps. And again, like some of these features are available now in the new builder, some of them are not quite available. So yeah, so these are an option to you if you've seen, some of you said you've seen story maps, but it didn't look like what we were looking at. Well, it's probably one of these templates. And if it fits your purpose better, you might want to think about using it in the next couple of years at least. I wanted to mention real quickly Experience Builder. This is a new product coming out. I think it's in beta, right? So they're pretty confident about it, but there still might be bugs. And I heard one person at a presentation that I attended who saw this. They said, "Wow, this is like story maps on steroids." So I know this image is a little dark and small, but I think you get the idea that there are a lot of different templates that you could have. Some involve maps, some don't necessarily involve maps. And it's pretty much a drag and drop sort of thing. You just bring your images in and you have all these different options for displaying images and text and things like that. So you would be able to access this through your ArcGIS Online account. And these are the templates that are available, but if you're really good and smart and stuff, you can actually, they give you the building blocks where you can create your own templates. So I do want to mention the open source alternatives because there are some, and you may be interested in them. I'm going to go and show you the first one is the one that I've heard about the most, and I think it's got some pretty interesting features. The next one, Odyssey, is well, what always stops me when I start looking at Odyssey is it talks about using markup language. So I don't know much about that. So you would need to have some experience in that kind of thing. But that is another option for a different kind of looking story map. This guy down here, I just wanted to share it with you because it will show up in a Google search, perhaps maybe on page 2 or 3. However, every time I visit this website, they haven't added any content since 2016, so I don't think it's super robust and it may not work at all, but I just wanted to let you know what's out there. But let's take a quick look at StoryMap.js. That was what I was showing you before. So this is open source, free, you don't need an account or license or anything. And I know at least one faculty member at UCR has used this in her class in history. She had her class create either a story map or a timeline as a class project. The thing about this is it really is map focused, and it takes you point by point by point in a established order. So if that fits your story, that's great. However, not as much flexibility, I think, as what we saw with the ArcGIS Story Maps. Here are some examples, and I wanted to point you to a couple of them that I think are pretty interesting. This one here is not a guided tour of a map, it's a guided tour of a painting that has a lot of allegorical components to it, so it's kind of neat. They take you, this is what the rabbit means up here in this corner, and this is what the color that's used here implies, and that kind of thing. So that's pretty interesting, a creative use of the story map. And this guy is pretty new, and it's neat because it's kind of choose your own adventure. So you can choose among these different time travelers, they call them, and it'll take you on a journey with them. So yeah, as you can see, they're using a historic map, some text about it, an image, and so forth. So that's pretty cool, an interesting use of this technology. So, and then you could go back and pick somebody else. So it's kind of fun. All right, we've come to the time where we can answer questions. I think Margarita might have also put a link in the chat to our evaluation survey. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, I did.
Okay, so if you check your chat and follow that link, we'd really appreciate it. It just takes a minute to fill out the evaluation, lets us know whether and how much value this was for you, helps us understand what to tweak in the future and maybe what content to offer in the future. So I just want to thank you all, and now I'm going to bail out of this. I am open for any questions you might have at this point. I haven't checked the chat yet, sorry, so I don't know if there are questions in there. Maybe I could do that now.
No questions. Oh, there's one.
Where does the data live? Yeah, so if you're using ArcGIS Story Maps, it is in the cloud on a server managed by Esri. So that does give some people pause, but so far so good as far as I know. And certainly if you're part of the ArcGIS or UCR ArcGIS Online organization, it'll be grouped with all the other content that's produced at UCR. Can it be integrated with Scalar? Good question. I'm sorry I don't know the answer to that, but Kathy, I can follow up with you on that one. Yeah, thanks for asking that. Okay, yeah, I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer for any questions that come up or just to chat about what you've seen. I hope that this has sparked some ideas for you and made it maybe a little less intimidating if you're thinking about trying this. I think it is worth a try. I learn something every time I play around with it, and there's a potential to make some really interesting presentations either for the cause that you're interested in or the work that you want to share or just vacation, you know, a nice alternative to a photo album for vacation. Can you move a UCR story out to a personal account? Yes, there is a way to do that. We would have to talk about how that works. There's been a couple different ways over time, and that might evolve again. But there is a way to do that. Yeah. So that's a question that comes up a fair amount. So yeah, it does get complicated, and you guys can reach out to me. You know, my contact information is on the last slide that you'll be getting, and I'll be emailing you guys with the slide and the recording and all that, and the handout. One thing that's on the handout that was not in the slides is that every year Esri has a story map competition, and this year's competition is now open, and it closes in November, end of November. And they have a theme this year, which is about sustainable development goals. So when you get the handout, and if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and click on the link for that. Is there hands-on training? So with this virtual way of presenting workshops, we opted not to do hands-on this way. However, certainly in a smaller group or something, we could do that. One thing I will say is that honestly, a lot of the help documentation that's out there that Esri has put out is honestly helpful. I cannot say that about all of their products. I have been many times frustrated with the help that they say they're providing, but in this case, I think the story map documentation is pretty helpful. So lots of resources out there for you, and you can take your time and work through them, tutorials, yeah, all that good stuff. So, but certainly, you know, if it makes sense to get a small group together and we can take our time and kind of go through it together, I'm open to that as well. Or, you know, even a one-on-one consultation. We librarians can do that as well. So if what you'd like to do is kind of work through how to get going on a story map, you could book a consultation with me. I'd be happy to help. Okay, I'm just scrolling through, seeing if I missed anything. Great. Well, gosh, it's 3 o'clock. How about that? So I'm going to stop recording now and wish you all well for the rest of the day. But I'm happy to hang on a few minutes more if you have questions you'd rather ask, you know, one-on-one or whatever. So thank you all, and we'll be in touch.